We read Psalm 139 to open the service, and I'd just like you to sort of think back to that. Where can I go from your presence? And the answer is like one of those rhetorical questions. There is nowhere you can go to get away from God. And we're going to have just a brief series on the book of Jonah. My plan is just to spend a Sunday on each of the 4 chapters. And many of you might say, well, I know the story of Jonah. I've known that since I was about 2 years old. You know, they have kids' toys that swallow He-Man figures and stuff, and they do. But we're going to look at Jonah in a way, sort of like a model for your Christian walk, for the way that you relate to God, for the way that you think about when God asks you to do something. Is it an interruption? An interruption, we usually think you interrupted me, like it's often a negative, bad thing, like, why did you interrupt me? We might teach our children, don't interrupt me when I'm speaking. You stand there quietly and, pull on my hem of my shirt or something. Mama, I need to speak. We don't generally think of interruptions as good things. But I would hope that by the time we are done, that you would beg God to interrupt your life. Because it really is a blessing when you think about sovereign God, maker of the universe, cares enough about you to say, Katie, I have something I want to talk to you about. And it's not you going to God, it's God coming to you. And that's what happened to Jonah. Jonah chapter 1. Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah, the son of Amittai, saying, Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me. But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went on board to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord. But the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the sea threatened to break up. The ship threatened to break up. And then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. But Jonah had gone down into the inner part of the ship, and had lain down and was fast asleep. So the captain came and said to him, What do you mean, you sleeper? Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us, that we may not perish. And they said to one another, Come, let us cast lots, that we may know on whose account this evil has come upon us. So they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. And then they said to him, Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? Where do you come from? What is your country? And of what people are you? And he said to them, I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. Then the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, What is this that you have done? For the men knew that he was fleeing from the presence of the Lord, because he had told them. Then they said to him, What shall we do to you that the sea may quiet down for us? And the sea grew more and more tempestuous. And he said to them, Pick me up and hurl me into the sea. Then the sea will quiet down for you, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. Therefore they called out to the Lord, O Lord, let us not perish for this man's life, and lay not on us innocent blood. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they picked up Jonah and hurled him into the sea. And the sea ceased from its raging. And then the men feared the Lord exceedingly, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. And the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. And Jonah was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. Jonah was a very successful prophet. He lived in a place in Israel called Gath-Hepher. It was 2 or 3 miles north of Nazareth, really, in Galilee. So when they said, can a prophet come out of Nazareth? Really, yeah, one had already come out who had a book in the Hebrew scriptures, and that's where Jonah came from. He had prophesied and had his prophecies come true, and people believed he was a true prophet. They believed that he heard directly from God. He was a good speaker. He had people who came to his meetings, and he had a good life. He was respected. He served God his whole life. And when God came to Jonah in his life, he was blindsided. He was totally thought, God, how out of the blue. I'm happy. I'm serving you. I like what I do. What do you mean, go to these people, these horrible people? The city of Nineveh was a place where the people were known for their brutality. They skinned people alive. That's where the phrase came from them, the Assyrians in Nineveh. It was a bad place. And probably most of the people that Jonah knew would have been really happy if God had done a Sodom and Gomorrah thing and rained fire from heaven and just wiped them out. They would have said yippee, and it would be good news and they'd be happy. Nineveh was about 500 miles north of where Jonah lived, and that's a long way away. That's not just like a little trip, to walk to Nineveh. What God was calling Jonah to, here he had this successful ministry that he loved and was doing well. He was saying to do something that Jonah just thought, why would I want to go preach to those people? God, why do you care about them? We have plenty of people in our own town who need to know you better, and I have plenty of work here. I have a busy schedule. And he knew, the sad thing, he knew he couldn't stay there where he was in Gath-Hepher and just pretend to be a prophet. There had been a blessing of God on his life, and people knew that he heard from God, and that's what a prophet had to do. And in those days, if you were a false prophet, you said things that didn't come true, you said things that didn't come from God, essentially, they stoned you. You were done. And he knew he couldn't live a false life. He knew he couldn't disobey God, so he ran. He just thought, I'm out of here, because I can't stay here. You just really messed up my life, God. Thanks a lot. He wasn't happy that God had called him to do something special for him. He ran as far away the other direction as he could. We're not absolutely certain, but we believe it was near Spain that he was heading to. And I read that Psalm 139 to you at the beginning of the service because Jonah knew that psalm. He knew he couldn't really run from God, but it was almost just like here's my answer, God. You say, go to Nineveh. I say, forget you. I'm going to go to Tarshish. And he was not troubled about his decision. He went to sleep in the ship. He trusted, that he'd be okay. He didn't really think God was going to cast him out and send him to hell forever. He just thought, my ministry's done. And, people do that, not just pastor people, but people do that. Lay people, Sunday school teachers, worship leaders, people who do things in ministry, something changes. Different leadership comes in. Something happens, and people say, I'm out of here. You can't treat me like that. I liked it how I had it, but I'm not taking this, God. I'm out of here. I'm going. And so this story is not really one that only happened one time. It's one that was written down by Jonah, probably toward the end of his life, as almost like a confession Not anything to be proud of, would it be? If you had done this, would you write it down for the whole world forever to read? Or would you think, maybe if I don't say anything, they'll forget about that I was the prophet of God. I was the person God was talking to, and I said, no, forget it. I'm not doing that. But he writes it down at some point. He's the author of this story. And you'll notice some of the things when the way they're written, it's kind of like a police report, like just the facts. He doesn't embellish or he doesn't justify himself and say, but think how hard that would have been if I had done that. He just writes it. That's how it happened. God interrupted Jonah's life when he asked him to go to Nineveh. But think just in the parts we've read so far, what are the other interruptions? The sailors on that ship, they were experienced sailors, and they knew this is not a normal storm. And it doesn't say that in here, but they knew. Wrong season, wrong time. Storms like this don't happen. God is mad at someone. And they weren't believers. They weren't Israelites. They weren't Jehovah God believers. They were people who kind of thought there were lots of gods, and they were just thinking, wow, we need to pray to somebody because some God is angry that this storm is happening. And they were people who kind of knew, I think it'd be hard to be a sailor and not have a sense of there's something higher than us here, because weird stuff happens. And they were praying, and the captain of the ship was surprised to find Jonah. And I'm not sure if Jonah had already shared a little bit with them. You know, you're going to go on a long, dangerous journey to Tarshish. Maybe he had already said some of this to them, that he says he had already told him he was fleeing from God. Well, just think, you're on an airplane, let's say, and you're getting ready to go, and you meet the person next to you, and, oh, where are you going? Well, I'm fleeing from God. I'm just going as far away from here as I can get. He might have said something like that. I don't know. But at some point, he admitted to them he was running away. I'd like you just to notice that he went, and there was a ship waiting, and he had enough money, and he was able to book a passage at the last minute right before they left. Many believers would say, that's a God thing. God must have worked that out. And wrong, that's not a God thing. If you are going to run from what God's asking you, there'll be a ship waiting. There'll be something there that just seems like, yes, I knew I was right, that I shouldn't have to go to Nineveh. And be careful of that. Because just because something works out really easily does not mean if you have defied something God showed you in Scripture or He's calling you to do, easy does not mean the blessing of God. Sometimes hard means the blessing of God. Sometimes easy does mean that, but you cannot just count on the fact, it was right there, I had enough money. You can't count on that. We have to listen to God. So Jonah woke up and in his backslidden state converted all the people on the ship and said, oh yeah, I serve the God who made the sea, and yeah, that's who I'm running from. And sometimes that happens. I've heard stories of backslidden college students, believers, and somebody asks them and they say, oh yeah, I used to do that. I used to be a Christian. And they convert people. They actually tell them how to be a believer, and the people are saved. Well, basically that's what Jonah did. They believed. They realized when they threw Jonah in the sea, and it was just like that, and the storm stopped. That's not what happens. Storms don't calm down that suddenly. So in his running from God, God still used him to witness to people. In his running from God, God interrupted his life one more time. What do you think Jonah thought would happen? This is the part that kind of, when I was studying, I thought, wow, God, what did Jonah think? Was he suicidal? Was he so down and thought, I can't even get away from God. I am not going to Nineveh. I am not doing that. And he won't let me go. I might as well kill myself. Just throw me in the sea. Because he didn't think he could swim to shore. It was deep, and it was wild and crazy, and I don't know what he thought. Or was he, again, still the prophet of God, prophesying. Did God say through Jonah, you want the storm to stop? Throw him in the sea. We don't know. It doesn't say enough about that right here. But he did say, throw me in the sea. They didn't want to do it. They didn't want to be responsible on top of everything else. They thought they were all going to die. They didn't want to be responsible for murdering someone right before they died. But they did eventually throw him in the sea, and the storm stopped. Now, I would just agree with you if someone said, I can't believe you're preaching on this. I thought this story was totally discredited. I thought scientists had said there are no fish big enough to swallow a man alive. And I'll just tell you, I believe that the Bible is true. I don't know what kind of fish it was. We've called it a whale. It doesn't say a whale here. It says a great fish. It says God prepared the fish. So who knows? It could have been a one-time created fish just to hold Jonah. I don't know. And that's the weird thing about me. I just believe that God does do miracles, and I accept that. I absolutely accept it. That a fish swallowed Jonah, and that he was in the belly of the fish 3 days and 3 nights. And that does not sound like a bit of fun to me. It sounds really gross. There's nothing I'll get out of my trash quicker than fish guts. Ooh, bad news. Don't want it around your house. And I sure wouldn't want to live inside a fish. But he did. And as we look at the story, think about it. God, on top of everything else, Jonah is just such a rebellious guy, but God sends a fish to swallow him so he doesn't drown in the ocean when the men throw him in. And even then, he doesn't say, Uncle. He doesn't say, okay, God. He stays in the fish 3 days and 3 nights, hasn't prayed yet. Next week we'll talk about his prayer. But 3 days, 3 nights, he stays there pouting and mad and can't believe this happened. As we look at this story, you can see why I say an interruption that God does to your life may not seem pleasant, but there's no greater blessing than for God to rattle us out of our little Christian comfort zone where we think we have such a nice little life and we have our ducks in a row. And maybe you don't think that. Maybe you think your life is awful. But wherever you are in your life, for God to care enough about you, to interrupt you, to mess with your plans, to say, I have another idea, would you do this for me, is the most amazing thing that could happen to anyone. And if we aren't at the point that we will listen, that we won't overrule just our common sense, like, no, God, that would be a really bad idea, to whatever it is he says to us, we may miss out on everything God has planned for us and wonder, why is my life so powerless? Why is my life so boring? Why are there no miracles in my life? Why doesn't anything happen when I pray? Partly it could be that we ignore God every time he interrupts us. Right. Every time he says something, we say, nah, that's not happening. And God is not boring. He doesn't live in Hudson. He's present everywhere, including Hudson, but he is not limited to our small life that we have planned out. And I just challenge you today, as we look at this life of Jonah, it gets better. You might think, well, I've heard the whole story. Well, you haven't. It gets better. Take Jonah into your heart and think about it. He wrote this story down for you. I mean, he wrote it at the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, but it was not a pleasant, happy thing that he went through. And take his story and say, God, what are you trying to show me here? Is there anything at all? I'm not thinking there'll be a fish alongside the road to swallow you. I'm not saying that. But God is an amazing miracle-working God, and we tend to be very boring, slow plodders who want our life to never change. And that's so different. Even those of us who think we're exciting and wonderful are boring compared to God. So what we might think God should do or would do is probably not even in God's imagination for us. What he has is much better. And I just encourage you to open your heart, open your mind, open your thinking, open your prayer life, and say, God, what do you have for me today? And be excited about your life because you serve an amazing God. We have a worship song we're going to sing, asking the Holy Spirit to be with us, and I just encourage you to worship with us today as we sing it together.